I am president of Progressive Democrats of the Santa Monica Mountains, which is a chartered Democratic club and is also a chapter of Progressive Democrats of America and part of a group called PDA-CA, which is Progressive Democrats of America, California. So on behalf of all three entities, I want to welcome you to our second post-mortem of debate between Joe Biden and the other guy. So with that, so I'm going to let Alan Minsky say a few words. He's the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America. Let's hear what he has to say. And then right following that, we're going to have my Congressman, Ted Lieu, tell us what he thinks, which he missed our last meeting because our last postmortem because it was his wife's birthday. So he got a break, but he's with us tonight, but he has any other meetings that are waiting for him. So Alan, go, and then we'll get to Ted.
I think what I should do those, because I think Ted even has a tighter schedule than I do. I'm going to toss to Ted Lieu and just simply say at the top, I very much thought what we saw tonight was, again, it's just containment with Trump. He is, you know, he's a lot of noise, he's a lot of blather, a lot of dishonesty, a lot of misinformation. And, you know, Joe Biden is trying to articulate and make clear to the American people that there will be a return to competent governance, serious governance, a governance that is responsive to a society that is obviously in a unique crisis in this phase of our history that we need to have a rational governance be responsive to. There's a lot that's progressive that Biden put forward, a lot for progressives that we can look forward to trying to see follow, we can push forward through a democratic governance in the House, in the Senate, in the presidency. There's a lot of places where obviously PDA and our policies, we differ with what Joe Biden is putting forward in specificity, but it's clear he's open to dialogue with the progressive movement on policy issues. So it's just an incredibly stark difference. And I trust that tonight was a night in which we remain going forward to where we will see, if we have an honest election and no disruption, the defeat of Donald Trump in 12 days' time. I'll say a few words after Ted Lieu, but I'd love to hear Ted Lieu's
No, I don't want to, I could spend 20 minutes introducing Ted Lieu, but I think you'd rather hear from him. He is my congressman. He is an incredible progressive. He's brilliant. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you're making a big mistake. His questioning on the Judiciary Committee and other committees is always worth watching. His legislation is inspiring and forward-looking, and hopefully a lot of the things that he's working on, and he's Joel Segal on some legislation, will get passed once we take back control of this government. So let me introduce my favorite congressman and my own congressman and one of PDA's favorite congressmen, Ted Lieu. Where's Ted? Ted, you have to talk or we can't see you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for that wonderful introduction and for all your leadership. And Alan, great to see you again, and thank you for your leadership as well. I'll just give you my quick 3 thoughts about this debate. First of all, it was more watchable than the last one. Second, I thought Joe Biden was fantastic. And then third, Donald Trump actually lied more than he did from the first one, which you might find hard to believe, but in fact he did. And taken together, I don't think this debate hurt Joe Biden. If anything, it might help him a little bit. So in terms of just watchability, I thought having the mic silence the candidates for those initial 2 minutes was a good move, because it did allow.
I think Ted's muted.
Oh, he hit mute.
Sorry. Don't know why that happened. You heard my 3 quick points, right?
Nope.
Okay, so I'll give you my quick sort of 3 takeaways from the debate. Number 1, it was more watchable than the last debate. Second, I thought Joe Biden was fantastic. I thought he really brought his A game. And third, Donald Trump lied more than even the last debate, which I know is hard to believe, but in fact, you did. And so in terms of watchability, I thought it was good that they did have the mic cut off, and I thought that made everything much more civil. But a number of times you would see Donald Trump keep interjecting and pushing the moderator to get a last word in. And it was interesting because I was watching this with my wife, and she'd get agitated and sort of upset that Trump seemed to be bullying and trying to sort of revert back to his old self. And then in terms of Joe Biden, you may remember that for a very long time, right-wing media's main attack on Joe Biden was that he was senile, that somehow he was not with it, that he wasn't, grasping everything. You didn't see any of that tonight. Joe Biden seemed much more fluent in policy, much more informed, much smarter than Donald Trump. And so now you don't see the president or right-wing media attacking Joe Biden anymore on that line of attack because they can't, because they've seen it's completely fallen flat. And then just on the substance, Joe Biden talked about issues that most Americans want to hear, about healthcare, about how you put food on the table, about making sure that we don't separate kids from their parents. That itself is just grotesque, what the Trump administration did, and about climate change and how we transition to renewable energy. And so on the issues, I believe that Joe Biden talked about the right issues. And then you had Donald Trump repeatedly make bizarre attacks about Joe Biden accepting foreign money. Donald Trump, as you know, likes to project a lot, his bad things onto other people. And you saw just in terms of substance, I think Joe Biden really touched on issues that most Americans care about. And then just in terms of lying, Trump made a huge number of lies, ranging from, for example, the catch and release policy. Under the Obama administration, when they would do their immigration plan, if you had let's say a family with a parent and a kid, and they wouldn't separate them, they'd have them come back for a hearing. It was an astounding, I think it was 90-some% that came back for the hearing. And Donald Trump simply had it reversed, where he said less than 1% didn't come to a hearing. He just flipped that fact completely on its head. In terms of, for example, when you look at climate change, Donald Trump doesn't really seem to understand it, number one. But also the Paris Accord, it's a voluntary system, as many of you know. Each country decides for itself how it wants to reduce carbon emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions. And it's not as if France or Germany or China or any other countries forcing the US to do anything in the Paris Climate Accords, but it's a voluntary system that all countries are agreeing to take steps to implement to reduce greenhouse gases. And I can go on with his other lies, but at the end of the day, I don't know how much this moved the needle in terms of the actual polling and the actual race, which means Joe Biden wins because he's ahead right now in the national and swing state polls. And I think if anyone is sort of not comfortable voting for Joe Biden after tonight, I don't think they'll have that fear anymore. So I think this has probably helped Joe Biden rather than hurt him. So that's my general sense. You're muted, Dorothy.
Thank you, Ted. So how long can you stay with us?
Probably another 5-6 minutes.
Okay, anybody have a question, Ted?
I do.
Okay, Jenna,
Thank you, Dorothy.
make it short.
I will. I'll try to be quick. Thank you so much, Honorable Ted Lieu, for joining us. I got to meet you last November when I was sign waiving for Dave Min. I just have a couple of thoughts about the debate tonight. Number one, do you have anything to say about Trump's outrageous claim that we want to spend $100 trillion tearing down buildings so that we can rebuild them with tiny windows?
Right.
And I do want to tell you that I live in a red district. I'm in South Orange County. And I was listening to it on my balcony and my entire complex went silent tonight. So I think it's actually a good sign.
Okay, thanks, Jenna.
So I actually thought it was helpful when Trump would make very extreme claims like that. First of all, most America has no idea what he's actually talking about. Second, no one really believes sort of extreme things that he says. And then he made a number of these sort of bizarre statements, not only about windows, but also about windmills. No one really knows what he's talking about when he talks about these windmills. He has this sort of obsession against wind energy. And a number of times he would talk about and make references to things that most Americans had no idea what he was saying unless you watch Fox News primetime 24 hours a day. So I thought it was actually helpful that he would go to extremes and just throw out just on its face statements that most Americans would think that just can't be true.
Right. Joel, how about you? You got a question for Ted? I know you've worked with Ted.
Yeah, first of all, Ted, it's great to, last time I saw you was in California. The question I have is, when Biden wins, what would you say that the progressive movement needs to do to have maximum political power to move towards 100% clean, renewable energy, Medicare for all, ending homelessness, housing for all, jobs for all, legislation that we have in Congress, but I think the progressive movement is too fractured and fragmented. What would your advice be? I worked on the Hill for 13 years for John Conyers. His answer would say, he'd say, Mandela King, we got to unify, or we're not going to have the power to move progressive legislation.
So that's a great question. So first of all, unifying is very important. I think it's also quite heartening to see tonight Joe Biden talk about climate change the way that he did. He didn't have to go out and actually volunteer that he was going to transition away from oil and cut subsidies to oil. He knew that's probably not the best issue in places like Texas or Pennsylvania or some of these other swing states. He said it anyways because he believes it. And if you saw his DNC convention acceptance speech, he mentioned 4 topics that were priorities. One of the 4 was climate change. So I think that is one issue that progressives can really unify around, and we can do a lot because it's something that Joe Biden has talked about, that he believes passionately, and we're really running out of time. We just need to do some major work on passing laws to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or else it'll be too late. So that's one issue I would focus on. Getting immigration reform through. I think you saw Biden at his most angry tonight when he was talking about the separation of kids from their parents. I mean, that's horrific. I mean, if anyone actually did that to people in the United States, we would go to prison for a long time. You can't just separate kids from their parents. So I think immigration reform is another issue that progressives can push. Yes.
Okay. You know what? I see that Daniel Ellsberg has joined us, and I wonder, Daniel, have you got anything that you'd like to ask or say to Congressman Ted Lieu?
And Dorothy, I had a follow-up very quickly.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, is Dan there?
I love the opportunity. I didn't anticipate it. To congratulate Representative Lieu on his work on nuclear weapons, on the no first use of nuclear weapons. You've noticed, like as I have, I'm sure that has not been an issue in this campaign. And the fact that one of those presidents is one of the people up there does have the power now to launch nuclear weapons and is clearly unstable. Made your bill. What do you foresee from President Biden on such an issue?
You know, that is a great question. I have no idea. I actually have no idea what Biden thinks about no first use. And that is an issue I'm absolutely going to explore, because I believe we need to go to a no first use policy. And we just need to respect the Constitution. There is no way to interpret the Constitution other than that Congress has the power to declare war. And there's no way to call launching nuclear weapons anything other than war. I mean, it's basically an action that that's I don't think an issue we can push and get them, the administration, to commit to a no first use policy.
Can I ask, if I'm not mistaken, in these debates and in the campaign as a whole, I haven't seen the issue of nuclear weapons raised by either side in the slightest degree. Actually, that was pretty true in the last time as well. What do you make of that? Why this isn't an issue?
I don't know how the moderators came up with their debate topics, but I do suspect that the pandemic did sort of eat up a lot of the topics and things related to the pandemic. If we weren't in a pandemic, more questions about foreign policy and nuclear issues may have come up. So I think that is part of it. But you're right to point it out, because actually most America has no idea what Biden or other people think about no first use.
Anyway, thank you.
Would be the vice president as well.
Yes, I've admired them.
And Joel Segal had a follow-up question. Joel?
First of all, it's great to see my brother Daniel Ellsberg again. Haven't seen him in several years. Thank you for being on this, Daniel. Representative Lieu, one of my favorite members of Congress. One thing that I did not hear from either Trump or Biden, or a question, you know, from the esteemed journalist, was what are you both going to do in terms of having a safety net for the 30 million people who will be on the verge of eviction, for those who don't have food, for businesses that are closing. And I find that very disappointing, because I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that is really the most serious problem. Evictions, utility cutoffs. We need moratoriums on utility cutoffs and evictions. You know, what do you think, Representative Lieu, should be our policy going forward in terms of Biden gets in? What should our demand be, and how can the Progressive Caucus weigh in? Because it's not, I don't hear enough of it.
By the way, if we win North Carolina, it's over. So hopefully we win North Carolina on November 3rd. Right. Now, in terms of what you talk about, you're absolutely right. The stimulus package that they did somewhat discuss generally does have funding in there to help people. Not just stimulus checks to American families, but also there's funding directly to help people who can't pay their rent. And it would be great if we get something done before the election. The holdup actually isn't Nancy Pelosi, it's actually Mitch McConnell. So Trump lied about that as well. But if it's not done before the election, there's a chance we get it in a lame duck. If we can't get it done in a lame duck, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win, which I think they will, then we will have a big package on January 21st.
All right, thank you. Do you have time for one more?
I'll take one last one.
All right, one more question. Harvey Wasserman. Unmute Harvey. Harvey's muted.
He can unmute himself.
Congressman, good to see you, and Dan Ellsberg. For both of you, I wore this shirt, my No Nuke shirt. This is the first, I was really blown away. This is the first time I've heard a presidential candidate advocate a 100% renewable economy with the shutdown of the oil industry. I mean, that's a staggering, what do you think are the prospects for that over the next 4 years if Biden and Harris get in?
So really that's a fantastic point. And so let's not lose sight of how far we've come. The fact that a major Democratic nominee was able to even say that, and not only say that, he volunteered it. It's not like he even had to say what he said. He went ahead and affirmatively said about transitioning away from oil, going to net zero emissions, and fully going to net zero in the coming decades. So first of all, it's on record. He said it before, hundreds of millions of people. So now he's committed to it. And that's what we have to push for and make sure we do in the Biden administration. But it gives me great hope that he said that tonight.
I want to point out real quickly, Texas has a huge wind industry, and probably more people working in wind or close to it now than in oil. So that should be
actually more people work in solar than in oil.
Okay,
So-
it looks like Alan Minsky had a question. I didn't see his hand up. Alan?
Oh, well, no, the only thing Ted has to go, but I suppose I could ask Ted is just, before you go, with the question, one question that was asked in the last debate, but not in this, is will you respect the results of the election? And we all know that Donald Trump is poised to throw his temper tantrums, to signal to his base to not accept the results. What are your thoughts, and what do you feel that you can do as a congressperson to ensure that the results are respected in that scenario? Yeah, how would you recommend all of us respond if that is the scenario that plays out, that Biden is winning and Trump in some manner is expressing his unwillingness to accept the results?
That's a great question. So I'm going to give you a complicated answer because it is important.
Right.
So generally, I believe if it's clear who won, if there's clarity to it. So if either candidate wins by a comfortable margin, I think everything's going to be fine. The problem is if it's very, very close, then you've got some problems potentially. If let's say one state doesn't certify by the deadline, refuses to certify, or something happens where no candidate then gets 270 votes, electoral votes or more, or if there's this weird, scenario where they could also tie. In that case, it would go to House of Representatives, and it would be decided by the new House, and there'll be 50 votes, one per state. So every state congressional delegation gets one vote. So all of California, we get only one vote, even though we have a large number of members of Congress, and the state of Alaska gets one vote, even though they have one member of Congress. Right now, Democrats are behind in terms of state delegations that we control. We control 22, Republicans control 26, 2 are tied. So we basically have to flip 3 states in terms of control of the congressional delegation. Alaska and Montana are single state congressional delegations. We flip those, we gain control of those states. Michigan and Pennsylvania, if we flip 1 congressional seat in each state, we gain control. John Hoadley is a progressive running in Michigan. You all might want to take a look at supporting him. And then in Florida, if we flip 1 seat, we also gain control of that state. So that's something people might want to look at if they have some time and resources, looking at those 5 states and trying to flip congressional seats, particularly in those 5 states, 3 of which are presidential swing states.
All right, well, thank you, Ted, and we really appreciate you stopping by. And we hope we'll have a longer meeting with you soon.
Great.
Okay?
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dorothy, I should go in about 4 minutes. And
Okay,
so
well, let's bring in Daniel Ellsberg.
Well, I should say goodbye and just honored to be with Daniel Ellsberg. Thank you, Daniel, and everybody. I'll return after the interview on the podcast ends. So,
Okay, we'll
thank
see you
you
in a
all.
little while.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so Dan, what is your takeaway from the debate tonight?
So I think at the end of the day,
oh, it was a genuine debate actually, and the muting thing worked very well. I'm afraid that was a great help to Trump, because he wasn't given the opportunity to go wild and unhinged way, bullying way, as he did last time, which I suspect lost him a good deal of support. So he managed to during most of the time. Amazing.
Someone needs to be muted here.
Well, no, I mean, his mouth was shut. He wasn't exploding in front of us. So on the other hand, of course, they'd hoped that he would get under Biden's skin with the family references and maybe make Biden blow up, or that Biden wouldn't stay the course. And as I think, wasn't it Ted Lieu who said that he didn't show any signs of these dementia they keep accusing him of, and not having stamina and so forth. You just don't see it. I thought he did very, very, very well. Interesting little point. I was trying to, I wanted to have my son see if he could set me up with a live chat thing here about fact checking that was going on. I didn't get much out of it this minute. But I did notice one thing, that the New York Times said that he does have a current open Chinese checking, Chinese bank account. Now, that's a little dramatic, whether it matters or not. The Times also said that it wasn't public, that he never mentioned it in his public disclosures, whether there's anything bad about it or not particularly, but merely saying that he'd close it when he hasn't is rather blatant. As I was saying to Lou, I am struck issues that I'm very involved in this campaign, and that's despite the fact that I was, as I was telling Harvey Wasserman just the other day, that issues that I would say are the closest to my own heart. I'm very sorry to say that our two parties don't differ all that much. On nuclear weapons, really, you can't distinguish them very much. You could even say, I've had people say with some basis that Republicans have had more success going back, over the years in getting arms control agreements down than Democrats did. That was not Obama's greatest point. And the nuclear weapons, let's take intercontinental ballistic missiles. I'm very obsessed about the hair trigger to the doomsday machine. Neither party is moving on that at all. I think Lou, along with Markey and others, have raised issues like that with both presidents, George W. Bush and Obama lately, gotten no response as far as I know. Interventions, neither of them look good. And finally, on secrecy, of course, Obama tripled the number of people in prosecutions from all past put together, and Trump has increased that in 3.5 years, and has moved ahead to indict a journalist, and for the first time. So, which after all, Obama did fail to do, which refused to do on that. That is a point between them. But
talking about Julian Assange, just make that.
Julian Assange, yes, and which is, by the way, an absolutely terrible measure aimed at journalists in general in this country. They don't seem to be responding to it. Actually, when Julian was first indicted in the beginning of the year, there were widespread editorials about it in columns saying that this was a direct blow at the First Amendment and very, very serious. At last, the journalists realized that the Espionage Act could be used in its wording against them as well as against me or Ed Snowden or Chelsea. But since then, no major paper has covered that trial at all, or the issues, as if it didn't apply to them, as if they weren't involved. So, on these, here you have issues.
Drive me to school, turn to the windshield, with the oil stuck in the window.
What's going on? Someone not muted?
And on the climate issue, I thought Biden made a very good point. Could have said it even stronger when he said 4 more years of Trump on climate, and he said we'll be in deep trouble. Well, it can be said a little sharper than that. I haven't heard a scientist weigh in on the following precise point, but I think it's implicit in all that I read from them, and that is, we may or may not be able to reach either the 2-degree increase as a ceiling on climate increase that the Paris Accords first aimed at. We may or may not be able to hold things down to that with Biden's plan as implemented, whatever, or with anybody's plan. I would say with any of these plans, it looks to me like the 1.5-degree increase, which the scientists have later said should have been the ceiling, is very unlikely to be reached. The point being that Biden does have a plan for doing that, a $2 trillion plan. Bernie and others would criticize, and Bob Poland, for example, would, in a very good book with Noam Chomsky now, would criticize the actual measures under that somewhat, the allocation of efforts, but it is a plan, whether it achieves it or not. The current president, of course, is maximizing. And I haven't heard anyone suggest a way he could put, as president, more CO2 into the atmosphere than with his programs. He's taking out all the restrictions on it. Biden mentioned that. He is going for more exploration. Is Biden perfect on that? No, the man fracking, ironically, Trump came in on that. on the fracking. And that's, of course, different from the, say, Green Party platform, or Bernie or AOC, so forth. They would ban fracking. So there is a difference there. But for Trump to say that is pretty ironic, as I say, because Trump is all for fracking, as far as I'm aware, you know, both on the jobs and the oil and the profits, and all together. And, of course, more exploration, more production. He seems to be, I don't think he wants to maximize CO2. That's just collateral damage, along with the hurricanes and everything that will come with it. What he wants to do is maximize short-run profits of the fossil fuel companies, the oil companies. And Biden is not doing that. What I was coming to say, and I'll end with this, in just this one point, what Biden could have said is, well, I don't know, I don't say whether it would have been better, but it's an implication. Fact is that under 4 more years of Trump,
So much of this stuff
say,
is
2 degrees.
falsehood, and just innuendo that has very little evidence behind it.
4
And
years
they
in which proposed by 2030 to lower emissions by 50%. I think with 4 more years of Trump, you put that one simply out of play. It's not possible. And so you're absolutely heading for catastrophe here. As credit an emergency, and Biden could go more, could do more to say that and to move toward it, but he is moving toward it. And we have Trump who's moving the opposite direction. The world cannot afford this 4 more years of Trump, simply. Okay. I could say more, but I leave it with that, Dorothy. It's up to you.
While we're on the climate, thank you, Dana. I hope you'll stick around. Maybe there'll be some Q&A after. I just want to run through the panel and get some more takes. I wanted to see what Russell Greene thought about Joe Biden's environmental plan. Russell, you there?
I'm here, Dorothy. Thank you for hosting this again. Good to see everybody's faces. Daniel Ellsberg, it's an honor to be on a call with you. Thank you for everything you've done through the years. And I think you've nailed the climate report, as did Harvey in the notes, as did a few of you at the beginning. I think that if we're aiming to win the climate voter tonight, we won the climate voter. I think that if we're aiming to get President Biden to commit to something more aggressive than I think he intended to, we got it. So I was blown away that he said the thing about fossil fuels, as Harvey already noted, and Senator, pardon me, maybe soon, Congressman Lieu mentioned. I think the reason for that was that the question was not framed in its usual, do you believe in it? Is it real? Instead it was, what are you going to do about it? And it forced Trump to, of course, turn to his clean water and beautiful air idiocy. And then he pivoted to the economic reasons that we can't address climate, showing his complete detachment from understanding the reality of this existential threat, and in direct conflict with what we know America citizenry knows. They know we have to do something. So it's a real foul by Trump in terms of just being out of tone deaf to the reality of the moment. And I think Biden went further than we expected him to go. I would just say to all of us as a progressive community, the $2 trillion plan that Biden is putting forward is in large part because of the work of the progressive movement and the Senate and Senator Sanders campaigns. The unity task force that he talked about, AOC +3, hallelujah. That's how we were able to get ourselves into at least this conversation. It's far short from what we're going to need, as Daniel Ellsberg has told us. We're going to pass 1.5 degrees. We're going to pass 2 degrees. There is no plan that's been put forth yet that actually is going to deal with that. You should all know that the Paris Climate Agreement, as much as we want to talk about it, directionally bringing countries together, that's important. It's a 3.5 degree path to a 1.5 degree goal. So we need to acknowledge the value of the United States being in that, but not be deceived by what's actually necessary, which is even more than what is being proposed. So I would say it was a fantastic night. We're going to move climate voters. We're going to move the Biden administration, and he is signaling a awakenness that I am happy to see, and there's going to be a remarkable amount of work for us to do to get him to become the president that he's going to need to become to address the climate emergency. But it was a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Our friend Susie Shannon, our super progressive DNC member, is with us, and I wonder if she has any takes on what's going to happen with homelessness, poverty, and other issues.
Yeah. So first of all, my take on the debate really is that, you know, Biden's up by 10 points and he really came out looking like a winner. I think that he did a lot to, you know, confident, he did a lot to defend himself. He laid out somewhat of a program, while Trump was basically unwilling to take responsibility for anything, for the disastrous response to COVID, for separation of families at the border. He's been very clear that he doesn't support Obamacare, that he doesn't support the $15 minimum wage, that he will continue to support fracking. Nancy Pelosi is apparently responsible for holding up the HEROES Act and not the Republicans. And he went a long way in trying to frame Joe Biden as a politician, even though he is the president of the United States, right? You can't say that you're not a politician if you are the president of the United States. It's very clear like where he's going and how he's trying to frame the rest of his campaign. And he did a lot to try to put Joe Biden on the defense about his own record as the vice president. And I think Joe Biden did a great job sort of dispelling a lot of the misinformation, but also talked about what he supports. He supports the $15 minimum wage, moving to clean renewable energy, which was fantastic. He, you know, was for restoring the DACA program. And he said several times that the character of the country is on the line here. And he repeated that. So that's going to be, I think, for the rest of this election, that will probably be his tagline. So then who were the candidates speaking to? They weren't really speaking to us as Californians because our state is pretty much going with Biden, as we know. And a lot of these states, you kind of know where they're going. So they were really talking to voters in our swing states. So Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina. You know, Trump basically said, you know, closing down our states would hurt businesses in Pennsylvania. Biden talks about, like, having lived in Scranton, that his daughter, you know, is a social worker in Pennsylvania. So they're very clearly going for these swing voters. Just like last time, if you remember, in the presidential debate, we talked a lot about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is going to help decide this. North Carolina is going to help decide this. So we're really, you know, talking to those voters right now. And a lot of these other states are kind of decided. I know, you know, like during the portion of the debate where they were talking about the oil industry, and Biden was, you know, very clearly, you know, moving for clean renewable energy. You know, Trump pointed out, like, do you hear that, Texas? Do you hear that, Oklahoma? Do you hear that, Pennsylvania? So this is like a fight to the finish. It's gonna, like in 2016, it's gonna come down to a few states here. I don't think we're gonna have, I hope we have like an Obama blowout, right? Like we did when Obama ran the first time, but that's unclear. Now when it comes to, you know, sort of American families and that portion of it, I think there were some really good moments for Biden. When he talked about people sitting around the table and saying, if a family has bald tires, you know, can I afford to get these tires? Can I afford to pay my mortgage? He didn't really talk about renters and people who are really living in poverty, but he did point out, you know, millions of people are losing their jobs, blame that on Trump. So that was good. Another good moment was when he said healthcare is a right? So we need to keep saying that. If we want Medicare for all, it really helps to have a candidate, even though he doesn't support Medicare for all and has been very clear about that, to start with the premise that healthcare is a right is a good place to start. And then, just talking about in the context of healthcare, 20 million people rely on the ACA, that 10 million people have already lost their private health insurance. Those are really great. Trump was like constantly trying to push on fear-based issues. So he just clearly said like Biden will hurt Social Security, that the stock market will crash if he gets elected. And the great comeback from Biden was people don't live off the stock market, right? And so for most of us, that is actually true. And so I think it was good. I mean, I think for people who are at or below the poverty level, there wasn't really a lot of talk about rent relief, like Joel said. There wasn't really a lot of talk about how people are going to put food on the table. But I think overall, I think that folks are going to understand that Biden is actually going to be better for them in that context than Trump. And so I'm hoping that we're heading for a victory in a couple of weeks. I thought Biden this is probably his best performance of the two debates. I'm glad there are not going to be any more, actually, so we can just focus on getting him elected. But really, this is coming down Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. These states are going to be really, really important. Particularly, it seems like North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Florida. So I will leave it at that. And thank you for having me, Dorothy. This is great when you do these. And thanks for everybody for getting on.
Thank you, Susie. And, Quasi was supposed to be with us, and I wanted him to talk about criminal justice and if you heard anything encouraging. And I'm trying to look at the list of who might be able to give us some enlightenment. And I see Jodi Evans, and Jodi Evans is always interested in justice. So maybe she could give us a little bit of her take on what she thought about the criminal justice element of the debate. Jodi, are you there? I see you on the
Thanks, Dorothy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the most exciting thing was just that when Biden said, we need to let all these people out of jail that were arrested on drug policy charges. That was exciting because that's not what happened under the Obama administration. So that was very good. I mean, I think, what we've heard earlier from all the other speakers is there was some exciting news, that some framing that helps some issues. I mean, I wish when we talk about healthcare, we talk about healthcare and not health insurance. But the framing of some of the issues move the needle. And that's kind of what I look at a debate for, because when people are watching the debates, that is what's framing some issues. And I want to join Daniel in my concern around foreign policy. I mean, that was just a fail tonight if you're someone who cares about foreign policy on so many levels. But as Daniel said, here on nuclear weapons, Biden's talking about North Korea and saying they can only come to the table if they get rid of their nuclear weapons. It's like, do you know what diplomacy is? Do you know how you negotiate? And then making fun of Trump around it was really disheartening. And I don't think people realize that this trashing of China, this growing Cold War towards China right now, it's frightening. A nuclear war is an existential threat. I think, Daniel would be better at this than I, but I think it's like 6 nuclear warheads drop and we're in a nuclear winter and there's no food growing. So to play this game, instead of to be in how do we get along? I mean, Biden was even calling, the head of Russia and China and North Korea thugs. That is not how you be in a conversation. And in a weird way, Trump looked better. It's like, to negotiate with people, you kind of have to be their friends and show up at the table. But, after what we saw in Libya, nobody's going to give up their nuclear weapons because they know they're going to get incinerated because of it. And it's not like we're going to you give up your nuclear weapons, we're not going to give up ours, isn't exactly the way to bring people to a table. But we need to know that yes, the growing Cold War is a horrible thing, and we cannot be hating on China. We need to be cooperating with every country, especially China right now, especially on pandemics. or on global climate change. And they were all like, they were going to beat China on Paris Accords. China's already beat the US on the Paris Accords and made commitments way broader than anything the United States has done. So that was kind of like funny to watch them both trying to say, we're going to force China. But the other thing about this hate on China is that it is driving Asian racism in the United States. Xenophobia is up and people are getting hurt. And this is happening in the alleys and the streets of our own cities. So yes, it's an existential threat, another Cold War, but it is also something we need to take very, very seriously. And so I don't think taunting and laughing at people is a good way to be in a conversation. Like they were talking about how they didn't like it when foreigners and got involved in US sovereignty. Well, what about the US quit getting involved in the sovereignty of other countries? We just watched a democratic victory in Bolivia this week after the United States led a coup against an indigenous leader. So it's just the foreign policy, besides it being heartbreaking about how uneducational it was and kind of stupid it was, it just doesn't seem to be covered, even though, Trump's got us in these wars, even though he's pushing himself as the peace candidate. He's not the peace candidate. He's been driving wars, and wars with sanctions. What is happening to Iran and Cuba and Venezuela with these sanctions is unconscionable. What is happening to the US supporting a war on Yemen, the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world? You have these things happening and they're not mentioned. So that's a little heartbreaking, and the framing of what we do with the money that could be funding education and healthcare and the needs of our communities, which goes in the Pentagon, there's nobody talking about cutting the Pentagon in half, which is necessary. So that was my sadness about it. Daniel, I'm just curious about, your sadness around that, the nuclear weapons not being discussed, and as you know, Obama's got $1 billion nuclear weapon program that's going forward. That's nobody talking about ending that. They're talking about ending Obamacare, but not the violence.
Yeah, before I let Daniel respond, I just want to say that we're not going to get anybody to give up their nuclear weapons until we give up ours, because these nuclear weapons are purely defensive on the part of countries like North Korea. They see what happens when countries admit they don't have nuclear weapons, like Iraq did, and then they get invaded. So unless you have your nuclear weapon, you run the chance of the United States invading you. So you have to keep your nuclear weapon. What do you say, Daniel?
Well, if I may, Dorothy, and relate just to what Jodi was saying about North Korea, I was happy to see at one point that a couple years ago, that Trump dropped his fire and fury, and that a couple of flattering letters from Kim were enough to make him fall in love with Kim. They were lovely letters, and we fell in love. And actually, those are available in the Woodward book now. Trump wouldn't allow his letters to Kim to be seen. He said, "Oh, they're very super secret," but they have somehow let out the Kim letters, and you look at those, and you think, he's just sucking up here to, and while he's building the missile, whatever. But anyway, it's what I was happy to see that he was talking to North Korea, and also something a couple of years ago that you could actually credit Trump with, that he was allowing, as others might not, the South Koreans to deal directly with the North Koreans in approaching a deal, and that was fairly promising. Now, there was always really going back a couple of administrations here. William Perry was involved in the negotiations and so forth. If you go back, Perry believes, and Carter believed, also was in on this, that you could have kept them from testing nuclear warheads and testing missiles at all, going back years. And that just fell through the cracks entirely when George W. Bush came in. Those negotiations were stopped. So the idea that you can't negotiate with North Korea is just wrong, according to these people. Then once they have them, now it's another matter. The idea that that Kim would give up entirely his nuclear weapons when the secret at all of regime change plans, special forces in the area, covert operations of various kinds. It's very obvious that Kim would think of those nuclear weapons once he had them and no deal had been made and the war was still on, right? They couldn't even get a peace agreement out of them, let alone aid of various kinds and boycotts, the sanctions. He wasn't going to give those up. So the question was, could you keep him from testing more missiles, and as he just has, and testing more warheads? They claim, for example, this ties into my general point here. The North Koreans claim that they had one thermonuclear test. And after some doubt of that, I think the intelligence community said, yes, it may have been a thermonuclear. It exceeded so much the earlier tests. Now, you could have avoided that with negotiations, but there's still a lot to avoid. Without being a real, I don't know the technical side just enough of this. I don't believe they can put a small thermonuclear warhead on that ICBM they've just tested without more tests. And will it make a difference for North Korea to go from atomic bombs, which it may have now, the kind of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that we use, to thermonuclear weapons, which require a Nagasaki type fission bomb, atom bomb, to set off the H-bomb, which can be 1,000 times more powerful, or 50 times on an ICBM warhead. You move, actually, North Korea at this moment, which has enough material allegedly for about 60 fission weapons. And how many they have operational, I don't think we actually know, but the usual estimate is 10 to 20. They may be the only one of the 9 nuclear states that can't cause nuclear winter. Because with 60 fission warheads, you can burn 60 cities, but that doesn't quite give you nuclear winter. It might reduce sunlight and consequent harvests, growing season and whatnot, enough to starve 1 billion people. And I don't pull that out of the air. I'm relating that to what Pakistan and India could do, which is very much more than that. Now, India, again, says that it has tested a thermonuclear weapon. If it did, it fizzled. So they don't have H-bombs. Pakistan doesn't have H-bombs. North Korea doesn't have H-bombs. The other 6, I believe, do, of the nuclear powers. Very few Americans know in this country the difference between an A-bomb and an H-bomb. And I know that because I've asked many audiences that question. And there was a time back around in the early 80s when they did know, because Physicians for Social Responsibility made them aware. The Freeze campaign and others really made people aware of what difference it made in terms of fallout, and now we know smoke for nuclear winter. But as I say, when I tell people, well, the bottom line is that an H-bomb, a thermonuclear weapons, which we tested in a mock form in 52, but a real form in 54, 10 years into the nuclear era, needs a Nagasaki bomb to set it off. It's that percussion cap, the detonating cap. And the 54 explosion was 1,000 times more than Nagasaki. So for North Korea and Pakistan and India to acquire thermonuclear weapons with more testing, with which Trump has talked about doing this year, has discussed that this year. And then it went back. The Republican platform has had renewed testing in its platform now in a number of years. They don't have a platform this year. Their platform is Trump's impulses, and it's their 2016 platform. I don't know whether they called for testing in that, but Trump has talked about it, and he is the Republican Party now. Okay. How many Americans even understand what difference that would make? And the difference is that North Korea could quickly acquire a doomsday machine with thermonuclear warheads and more missiles if it tested. And India and Pakistan that have been at war with each other, on the edge of war, the kind of continuing thing, would be threatening not just the 2 billion people that they could now starve to death, according to many scientists, including Alan Roebuck and Brian Toon, who've done these calculations. No, they could threaten 7 billion people or 6 billion. Well, it's a difference. So I'm saying the American public remains ignorant of this. And despite, a difference between the two parties is very much this, that there is a progressive caucus in the Democratic Party, has either 97 or 99 members, I don't know. In the Senate, there's Ed Markey, and I'm very glad to see that he retained his position. He's good on this issue, always has been. And of course, Bernie Sanders and others who have joined, about 10 or 11 senators joined Markey in letters to presidents in the last 10 years that are for getting rid of ICBMs, no first use, no low yield weapons, 10 or 11, and including Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and Markey and a few others. Even Feinstein, amazingly, has joined some of those. And so I've asked people in Washington, well, God, can't we make it 12, 15? And they say, no, 11 is what you get. Well, that's good. It's not good enough. The Republicans hardly, no, I don't think anybody. Once in a while, a few House members have been good on this, a couple of Republicans. So I'm saying the public remains ignorant. The Congress is ignorant. I'll just say under the cover, I had a discussion with Senator Feinstein. She had been head of the Intelligence Committee, and I'll just say in terms, she is not well informed.
That's not well informed about anything.
You say so. My God, that's Feinstein. So, and the parties, it's not an issue. Now, one for the final thing. Bernie Sanders came out this year in the Congress, in the Senate, for a 10% cut in our, $70 billion in this incredible defense budget, they said. Nowhere, that got nowhere. 70 billion would be good, but Barbara Lee was on the right track. She said in the House, half.
Yeah.
50 billion should go in a year. That is now in the right ballpark, and it could go way down below that, but not in the US of A, not in the actually existing democracy we live in. Hardly possible. They've made so clear that every district in the country, almost, there may be a few, has subcontractors for Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed, the others. Every senator has them in his state. Jobs, campaign contributions, donations and whatnot. I remember Chalmers Johnson, not to go into it, I was just talking about him today with somebody. Just before he died, he said, it's hopeless. You can't get rid of the empire.
Oh, Daniel, you can't say that.
He was dying. He said it to me, and he didn't say it to me. But it's not hopeless. To say it's impossible is wrong, because we don't know that much. Impossible things happen. I was saying to somebody today, I was talking to a younger audience on Zoom. I don't believe one of them can imagine what it meant to see on television the Berlin Wall being cracked open. That wasn't unlikely. That was impossible. A few years earlier, it was impossible. No one had said that. Nelson Mandela coming to power nonviolently, not unlikely, that was impossible. And so these things happen, and we can't say, it's not impossible, it's simply wrong. That's talking about a certainty that is not justified. To have that kind, we don't know enough.
Wasn't it Nelson Mandela who said it's impossible until it happens?
Probably a little less improbable, and it is possible.
Yeah.
Both
Mandela said everything's impossible until it happens.
Both parties. Well, I won't wait for the Republicans. Really, it's not since, I have to say, since the early 80s, it's not easy to tell the two parties apart, despite the progressive members in the Democrats. But I'm talking about the leadership in the mass of the people. You can't tell them apart on the defense budget. They're competing with each other to provide those jobs and to do it. And on nuclear weapons, it's just so.
Thanks, Daniel, for answering my question. You know, I think we need a feminist restructuring of global relations. So, and we've, you know, the Poor People's Campaign laid out exactly the way to cut the Pentagon budget in half. It's laid out, it's already there, and Barbara Lee's gonna run with it in the next administration. So it's a possibility because you can, if you can name it, you can make it happen. And just like my parting remarks are, you know, the best thing is that's the last time we're gonna have to see Trump in a debate. So thanks for having me on, Dorothy. Great to
Jodi,
see
thank you for joining us. I'm so happy to see you there. I thought you were going to be really late. As much as we want to talk about nuclear, and we'll get to Harvey in a minute, I just wanted, I think we've already lost Joel, but I was wondering if Dr. Bill had anything to say about the healthcare aspect of this debate. You there, Dr. Bill?
Yes. Hi. Not a whole lot. I mean, you know, we do, and thanks for asking me, Dorothy, and great comments. By the way, that was a fascinating discussion with Jodi and Dan just now, and Russell. You know, fantastic. I think I don't feel as good about Joe Biden on healthcare as Russell does on climate, but I think that that we are talking incremental change. And Susie Shannon, you're right. All the establishment Democrats seem to have that expression down, that healthcare is a human right in their opinion. And thank you, Bernie Sanders, for cementing that in their brains. But it doesn't demonstrate any appreciation for the expression, right? So I mean, if they really knew that it was a human right, then they would understand that commercial insurance it can't be allowed the waste, fraud, and abuse that it presents to people all the time, including, excuse me, the story that Joel was sharing with us in the chat about his own healthcare experience. So Biden, you know, presents once again his incremental plan for a public option. Both of these guys, Biden and Trump, you know, seem to have no appreciation for what it means to have a pre-existing condition. You know, that by virtue of being a human being, we all have pre-existing conditions. That's what it means to be a carbon life form on this planet. But, you know, if we're gonna, at least Biden has the insight to include everybody with who's had COVID-19 at this point. So thank you very much, Joe Biden, for that. And no, I don't think we have to convince them at all about the virtues of a single payer system. They've understood that since before Ted Kennedy pushed for that in Congress. What we have to convince them of is that nobody really loves their insurance, you know, their commercial health insurance, that it's lousy, it's a bad deal for Americans, and that's what more and more people are becoming aware of all the time. And it is just a matter of time if we don't all die of the next pandemic after this one, you know, due to rising global temperatures, you know, before it happens. So we will keep up the fight, and regardless of which one of those guys ends up in the White House, we need to push, you know, at the local level even more so that all candidates for school boards and city councils and running for, you know, at the county level understand that as well, that it would save them money and save lives as well. And so we just keep up the fight.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. All right, Harvey, I know you have responses to Daniel's comments on nuclear. Also, I would like you to talk a little bit about what's going on with election protection for people.
I will. I do want to say it was a pleasure to see a woman of color moderating. I thought she did a very good job. And I wanted to harken back very quickly. In the debate between Pence and Kamala Harris, she mentioned that diplomacy begins with relationships. And I thought that was a very important thing to say coming from a woman. And Mike Pence absolutely had no idea what she was talking about. It was quite amazing. And I want to point out it's very important to understand that the countries that are led by women are statistically significantly doing a better job of handling the pandemic than the countries run by men. Starting with Angela Merkel and in New Zealand and so on. So it's a big deal, and I think of all the candidates in this election, the most important is Kamala Harris because she represents a transition to control by women. I can't wait for the day when the United States has a female president. I think she'll do fine. So, and Dan, I certainly agree with all that was said about nuclear weapons. I mean, it's insane that we still have them. We don't see any inkling from the Democrats that they understand the gravity of the situation, and we'll just have to work on that. Trump has no idea whatsoever, but so at least we have an inkling of hope with the Democrats. I do want to say that I was in a meeting earlier today with Joel. I'm sure he's gone, but this election will not be decided by these debates or even a general sway of public opinion. What's really happening is that it's in the trenches every day now. Voting has started, and we are desperate to get lawyers into all of the precincts in the swing states because the Republicans are doing what they did in 2016 and 24 and 2000 as they are throwing out as many ballots as they possibly can. And this is most pronounced in the swing states, especially in North Carolina and Florida that we know about. But we have we have some really great people on the ground in both Florida and North Carolina, as well as in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And this election is being decided by election protection organizations. And you can join our Zoom call on Monday, email me, and I'll send you the link. As we speak, every day, we are trying to get at least 1 or 2 lawyers in every precinct so that they can guard against all these votes being thrown out. The huge majority of votes in this election are coming in by mail. And we also have people voting in person now, early voting, and most of those ballots are coming in on paper, which is a giant step forward, a huge leap that really offers us promise for elections in the 2020s. And so we will have to continue to work on this. But we are desperate for lawyers to go into these polling stations, especially in the swing states, and prevent these ballots from being thrown out. That is where the election will be decided in the first place. And secondly, there are electronic scanning machines, which we also like, which will be deciding the vote counts, but they are hackable. And there are some really funny things going on that we don't, whether or not they're unfunny things. And these machines also have to be protected. And I will tell you that in Florida, the votes are being pre-processed, which means that on the morning of November 3rd, all of the votes that have been cast in Florida will have been counted. And then the final result will rely on what can be counted that day. The Trump strategy, and I'm probably not telling any of you anything you don't know, is to delay the vote counts and pass the safe harbor date so that they can insert the state legislatures, which are in those swing states, are almost all Republican, and get this thing to the Supreme Court. And, it's very complicated. You've all been reading stuff about it. I've got a piece up on reader-supported news right now about it. And I sent one to Howie at Down with Tyranny. And the point is that it's all now, especially after this last debate, Biden came out of it intact. It's all about election protection. And the two key moments are, as I say, where they're throwing the ballots out in the precincts and then protecting the voting machinery. We could win this thing, if Biden could win this thing by midnight on Friday, if all the votes are counted in Florida and protected and he wins substantially. It could be over. But on the other hand, the Trump team knows which states they can go in, they can create chaos, they can delay the vote count, and they can get it to the Supreme Court. And that is what's really happening now. So we are desperate for anybody working on the election, who's willing to work on election protection, get in touch with me. We've had 22 calls of 90 minutes each on the details. Dorothy's been on them, a few of you have been on them, just on the details of how they're trying to steal this election. And it's taken every ounce of our strength to cover it's like filling a screen door on a submarine. But it's down right now to protecting these ballots from being thrown out and to protect the vote count and keep it out of the Supreme Court. So I'll leave it at that. It's grassrootsep.org. And Russell was kind enough to put my email. Email me directly if you can help with this. And that's where it's at. So Ruth has been on the calls too.
Jennifer Tanner is on the call.
Oh, Jennifer
has a new project. It's called Verify the Vote. Is that it, Jennifer? Are you there?
Yes. We're finding there's a
Jennifer,
proliferation.
if you're on, can you speak? Is Jennifer Tanner here?
She was. I don't see her. The good news is there is a proliferation of groups all over the country. She went off that we can barely keep track of that are working to protect it. I mean, we learned our lessons in 2000, 2004, and 2016, and then again in 2018 in a number of the states. And I can show you proof that the count of 6 U.S. Senate seats were stolen in the usual way. And, you know, we can't let that happen again.
Well, if you live in a swing state and you want to help by photographing the poll tapes, you should email Harvey and he'll put you in touch with Jennifer.
Or if you're willing to go in and to sit there and protect ballots from being thrown out. That's where it's happening right now. Poll tapes are on election night. But right now,
Kathleen Hernandez is putting in the chat that there've been election interference in Woodland Hills. The Trumpers have been blocking people at the post office trying to put their ballots in.
Well, the intimidation hasn't been as bad as was projected because of what Trump hates, which is vote by mail. The reason they hate vote by mail is it means people don't have to come to the polls and get intimidated by these Proud Boys and white supremacists.
Well, the Washington Post had a long article today about what's going on at the polls, and I posted it. I hope
it's still not pretty, but it's not as bad as it could have been. But this is where the election is going to be decided. Can they throw out enough votes? Can they create enough chaos to get the thing to the Supreme Court where they'll win 6-3 or 5-4? That's what it's all about.
Before we go any further, it's almost 9 o'clock. I just wanted to give a shout out to Mike Thaler. He's the president of Progressive Democrats of America, California, and he's been working the Zoom for us. And he always helps me set up these calls. I couldn't do it without him. But he's been great. If anybody has a question for any of our panelists, or if any of our panelists have some closing comments, now's the time because it's 9 o'clock. Anything further to say, Daniel Ellsberg? He's muted. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. God, I'm sorry. What was your question? I'm sorry.
Did you want to say anything before we're going to be signing off in a few minutes?
Just last thing I got in answering Jodi, and I'm sorry she's not here now. I got carried away, which is my want, and didn't quite address the problem. Very simply, and this is for Biden in effect, or even for Trump. It's too late for Trump. They're all the experts on Korea, and there are some like Segal, Harrison, some and Perry and others have always said, once now that he has the nuclear weapons, he's not going to get rid of them, period. That's not going to happen. But that you can make a deal, and a deal would be worthwhile, and a deal that kept him from, this is what I was implying, but I didn't draw the bottom line. keeping him from further testing is really worthwhile. It does make a difference. Keeping him, he could have, by the way, Trump could have made a deal that kept this ICBM from just being tested now, almost surely, and further tests, even though they had it under development. Things like ending the war and allowing South Korea to deal with North Korea, which they want to do. Ending a lot of the sanctions, allowing more trade as China wants to. You can make a deal, and that is worthwhile. And Biden could do it. And I think, as Jodi pointed out, he was taking a line that was kind of in the Obama administration of the last, which was, we don't talk to them unless they get rid of their weapons, unless, they're sure to get rid of the weapons. No, that is a not starter. That's a non-starter. That's not the way to do it. But as Jodi was saying, I think, sure, you should talk with him and they should make a deal. Yes, he is one of the worst people on the planet. But the idea, our regime change plans, which is the definition of empire, virtually, that we decide, who runs other countries and put in the people that will serve our interests. That should change. One person on that stand, she has various limitations, but Tulsi Gabbard kept saying, end regime change wars. And you can go a little further than that, end your whole notion that it's for us to do regime changes here in other countries, covert means in other ways, would be a big difference. And in this nuclear era, if you don't do that, we're not going to make it. And I'll just end by saying, I brought up Chalmers Johnson, it may not have been clear, to disagree with him, because no, it's not hopeless. And it can't be, actually, as I was saying. That doesn't make sense to rule out that we can, as humans, change. But as a species, we have a lot of changing to do. And let's get on with it. So thanks for this evening. I found it very interesting.
Thank you very much for being with us. I think it was another worthwhile evening. I think the only sad thing about the debates being over is that we got to stop meeting like this, but maybe not. Maybe we'll have to figure out something else to meet about. And
Dorothy, can I make
we really have to decide in this country, do we want a democracy or do we want an empire? Because they don't seem to be compatible. So.
Dorothy, can I say something very quickly before everybody leaves the call? Thank you, by the way, for hosting this. Everybody's saying that in the chat. It's really great to be with everybody. But just pivoting from what Daniel was saying to some real practical items. I know all of you are working nonstop on this election, but I found that I'm able to reach out to other family members or friends who typically think voting is enough, but are anxious, and asking them if they think they might want to do more, if they would like to join PDA. So I dropped in the chat the link to volunteer. We're doing very targeted phone banking in Florida, in North Carolina, as Representative Lieu said, if we win North Carolina, it's over. In Arizona and many other states with very intentional, I should say, strategy. So we could really use help on that. If you could just ask your friends if they want to try 10 calls. People seem to get the bug once they do 10. Thanks for letting me ask that.
That's contacting Mike Fox, right?
Yeah, Mike Fox, or the volunteer form will go directly to him. I put it in there, I'll put it in again.
All right, Dan, did you have something you wanted to say? You look like you were leaning forward and you wanted to say something, but you're muted. Maybe not. Okay, well then, on behalf of PDSMM, PDA-CA and PDA, let me say it's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to having another one of these meetings. For whatever reason, we'll have to figure out an excuse and do it again. So thank you very much. It's been a great evening, and I love these. Lots of little hearts and claps. Thank you, guys.